The man was truly astonished. He encountered a dragon in the lowest level of the dungeon. As a mere bronze-level adventurer, he was swallowed whole. Miraculously, the protagonist did not die but transformed into a low-tier version of a Bone King. From then on, the protagonist, in his quest to return to a blissful human life, began to grind levels and evolve relentlessly. The story began 2.5 days ago when the protagonist was still a human-looking bronze-level adventurer. Though not strong, he was known for his reliability. Every morning, he would check the Adventurers Guild for commissions and, if none suited him, he would grind in the lowest-level Watermoon dungeon. Selling the magic cores and materials from monsters allowed him to cover his daily expenses and slowly save money. This routine had lasted for 10 years. It wasn't that the protagonist lacked ambition, his talent simply limited his options. Yet, he persisted for 10 years, dreaming of becoming a silver-ranked adventurer. Perhaps this was the perseverance of an ordinary person. However, fate had other plans for him today, as he discovered a hidden passage in the Watermoon dungeon. Familiar with the dungeon as if it were his own home, he was certain this was an unexplored area, which excited him immensely. A good find could yield valuable items, and even without any loot, reporting the information to the guild would earn a handsome reward. Normally, one should not venture alone into such unknown areas, but the protagonist's rash decision changed his life forever.
そんな愚か者だから竜と相対する羽目になった。
Although the creature before him bore no resemblance to a dragon, the protagonist immediately recognized it as such. It was his first encounter, yet the oppressive aura unmistakably proclaimed its status as the king of monsters. The next second, he was swallowed. Perhaps he was excreted, for only his bones remained, yet his consciousness and memories were intact. This new form was undoubtedly that of a lowly skeleton. It took him a full 2.5 minutes to accept this reality. By then, the dragon had vanished. The protagonist decided to leave the area. Soon, he encountered his own kind in the middle levels of the dungeon. He thought he could easily defeat them, but his new body was incapable of swordsmanship. Fortunately, his opponent also fell at that moment, watching it clumsily reassemble itself. The protagonist felt helpless. Then, he remembered he possessed other powers and immediately activated chi, sourced from his life force, temporarily enhancing his physical abilities.
気の力で市内力を高め
To his surprise, the defeated skeleton emitted a golden light, which then entered his body, replenishing the chi he had used. The protagonist recalled a friend, a mad scholar who studied monsters. She had mentioned that monsters possess incredible characteristics, allowing them to evolve over time and experience. This was the so-called existential evolution. There had been skeletons that evolved into ghouls. Although still not human, ghouls have flesh and are closer to humanity. Perhaps, after evolving, he could return to town disguised with a cloak and mask. Thus, the protagonist decided to continuously defeat monsters in the dungeon to undergo existential evolution.
今日も来ないのか。夕飯は自分で作るか。
On the other hand, the protagonist had already defeated the fifth skeleton and was getting used to his new body. Through the recovery effects of defeating monsters, he could use the power of chi in every battle. He planned to challenge stronger monsters next. Soon, he encountered a slime. Although classified as one of the weakest monsters alongside skeletons, slimes are difficult to defeat with physical attacks. The protagonist lacked attack magic, so defeating it required destroying its core. As he approached, the slime spat acid, which he dodged before striking it down and quickly retreating to guard against a counterattack. Unexpectedly, the slime dissolved into a puddle. The protagonist thought he was lucky to hit the core, not realizing his abilities had surpassed his human peak after absorbing experience points. He collected the magic core and the slime's liquid, which, despite its acidic attack, turned into the best skincare product for women after death. Selling for a good price, 2.5 days passed, and the protagonist found he had no need for sleep or food. Through experimentation, he discovered he could wield both magic and holy energy through his new body, especially the latter, which is lethal to the undead. Holy energy could heal, purify water, and delay food spoilage. He applied holy energy to bread, extending its freshness by 3 days, hoping to evolve into a ghoul that could eat. He then began planning for the future, realizing he could win against 1 or 2 monsters but would struggle against 3 and had to flee from 4 or more. He lamented his weakness, having trained and sought knowledge relentlessly for 10 years for his dream. In subsequent battles, the protagonist realized his strength had increased. Slimes, previously troublesome, were now easily defeated with a strike to their core. Finally, he met the conditions for existential evolution. On her first venture into the labyrinth, the girl nearly fell victim to a skeleton. Unexpectedly, her life was saved by a ghoul, which only intensified her fear, as ghouls are known to be stronger than skeletons. Unbeknownst to her, the ghoul was actually the male protagonist, who had mysteriously transformed into a monster after being devoured by a dragon. Just recently, the protagonist had evolved from a skeleton to a ghoul. By continuously defeating monsters and absorbing their experience, he could evolve into a creature more closely resembling a human. After defeating 2 goblins once again, he suddenly heard the sound of a human fighting with a sword, seemingly battling a monster. Although it wasn't the time to reveal himself, the protagonist decided to check it out and stealthily approached the source of the noise, hoping his true appearance wouldn't be seen. After all, interacting with humans was dangerous at this point. Soon, the protagonist saw a girl fighting a skeleton, but she seemed to be losing. Judging by the situation, the girl appeared to be a novice adventurer, yet he didn't recognize her. Despite being a weak adventurer, the protagonist was well-liked and had made significant contributions to the Adventurers Guild. This is why he had been able to work diligently as a bronze-level adventurer for 10 years without being asked to leave. When he came back to his senses, he continued to observe the girl. Seeing the girl cornered and in dire straits, the protagonist intervened. The skeleton was immediately distracted by the stronger presence behind it, but the girl, lacking experience, didn't seize the opportunity to strike. With no other choice, the protagonist attacked, enhancing his strike with chi and defeating the skeleton in one blow. He then attempted to communicate with the girl using his hoarse voice, but this only scared her more. She kept her guard up, pointing her sword at him. After the initial shock, she realized he was trying to speak. Listening to his raspy voice, she paused for a moment before understanding that he was an adventurer. Though she couldn't fathom why he had turned into a monster, she thanked him for saving her life, and then he asked her for a favor: to buy him clothes from the town so he could return. She quickly understood his wish to return to town and nodded in agreement to buy him a robe. He then threw her a large bag of gold coins and stepped back. Despite her fear, she approached to pick up the coins and introduced herself as Lena. As the daughter of a knightly family, she promised to repay his kindness. Upon reaching the labyrinth's exit, Lena remained cautious of him. Once they were a safe distance apart, she turned and left the labyrinth. The protagonist understood her caution. Any other adventurer encountering such an oddity would likely report it to the guild immediately. However, his intuition told him Lena wouldn't do that. If he was wrong, he'd deal with it later. 2.5 minutes later, Shuela from the Adventurers Guild stepped out and saw Lena approaching to inquire about a shop. Meanwhile, the protagonist was wreaking havoc within the labyrinth. Feeling the changes in his body, the protagonist realized his strength was now far greater than when he was human. Despite his intense training while alive, he had seen little improvement. Now, in this new form, he finally possessed the talent he had always desired. While lost in thought, Lena's call brought him back to reality. After confirming she wasn't another ghoul, she relaxed her guard. Noticing his speech had become more fluent, he explained that he had been practicing speaking for the past 2.5 days. Satisfied with the coat Lena had bought, he was very pleased with her choice. Moreover, she had also bought bandages and gloves, items he urgently needed. Her kindness nearly moved him to tears.
気配りのできる親切な子なんだ。
Though his current body lacked the ability to cry, he then dressed in the clothes she had prepared. Lena handed him a mirror, and seeing his reflection, he felt entering the town might still be a stretch, but Lena had already prepared for this. Pulling out a mask from her bag, surprised, he tried on the skull mask, which unexpectedly adhered to his face and couldn't be removed. Lena was stunned and then apologized. The mask, bought from a roadside stall and not a guild-recommended shop, seemed to have been cursed. She was visibly frightened, but he didn't complain. Instead, he tried to use holy energy to purify the mask. The mask trembled under the influence of the holy energy, but all his efforts couldn't lift the curse. Lena apologized again, but he reassured her, suggesting that he might be able to remove it once he became stronger or save enough money for a powerful cleric to do it. Relieved by his words, Lena suggested they head to town now. Upon reaching the city gate, he prepared to bid Lena farewell, fearing her association with him might jeopardize her adventurer status. However, Lena argued that having an adventurer companion might make entry easier and that she owed him her life. Thus, they approached the city gate together, presenting their passes. The guards were vigilant, especially because of his suspicious mask. Lena cleverly explained that the mask was cursed and couldn't be removed, and his unclear speech was due to injuries from fighting monsters, demonstrating to the guards that the mask indeed couldn't be removed. They were allowed into the town without further issues, but when Lena looked back, she found he had disappeared. He had his reasons. Her kindness could inadvertently involve her in his troubles. It was better to leave proactively and repay her kindness once he became more human-like. He then turned and left. That evening, he arrived at a small house, finding no response to his knock. Entering, he found himself in the home of his most trusted friend, a woman named Narelno.